Alright, this is David again, coming back with the second part of my collage tutorials, which is going to roughly start out with picking and then we'll see where we go. And what is picking? It's just going through what material you have so that you can find the images and words that you want to use for your collages. And the important thing to remember about this is you don't need the best material in the world to make collages. You can do a lot with just things that you have around. And for a simple starter, I was thinking, why don't I just use my title cards from the last video? And you might be wondering, well, how can this be turned into an interesting collage? It's just a bunch of words and two different colors of paper. Well, that's only really true if you don't think outside the box. So I'm going to say that these three pieces are fine. I'm going to add a little bit of a drawing to this one. And I'm just going to do a very bad drawing of a face. This isn't to be serious and make the best art ever, it's just to show you that you don't need a lot to work with. So how am I going to turn these things into anything interesting? Well, to start with, stop thinking about these things as just what they are, and instead you can think of them as what you can do with them. So, for example, maybe this isn't the word collage, but instead what I want to do with it is to turn it into a bunch of striped red and white lines. And all I have to do is cut through it, and you can't tell that that was writing anymore. That's not very interesting, but you'll see what I can do with this in just a moment if I keep going. So, cut two. I've got some stripes. I've got these pieces that I don't know if there's anything good I can do with them, but isn't that interesting? I was writing on the back of something that was just packaging. And that means I can take that packaging, I can take this complete just trash. This would have been thrown away otherwise, and I can start cutting into it. And I hope my angle is good for the camera, but this is something that you don't have to have great stuff to start with as long as you think creatively. So, for example, now I've got a colorful drip of some sort. Maybe I'll make a couple more. And I don't want to go too far, but the point is, you can use almost anything to make collages. You don't need to have everything. You can collage your own drawings. You can collage just packaging, you can collage with cardboard boxes. You can collage with so much stuff. In fact, I think what I will do is use the first part of the tutorial as a background, but not like this. Instead, I will cut it. And I will take that and glue it. And when you're gluing things, you want to make sure the edge that you're leading with is fully covered in glue before you start pressing down. But as you go, if you have a little bit extra that you need glue on, you can fold it up and put some extra down there. And what I often like to do is use the glue stick itself to flatten out the glue, because you don't want any air packets. You don't want to have air stuck beneath your paper, because what that does is it lifts it up. Makes it harder to add on to. It makes the different layers stop working together as well. Well, now I have this strange face. Again, it's not very good, but this is just to show you that collage can be quick, dirty, easy, and not something that you really have to take so seriously that you get caught up in trying to be perfect instead of being caught up in trying to be creative. And that's my main goal, is to use collage as a way to play with art. And notice how there's these little pieces of glue that came off of the glue stick, and in situations like that, this is where what I was talking about will come through. If you use the back of the glue stick to rub it down, all of that will be flat by the time you're finished, and it won't be underneath your image. Now, I've got these red and white stripes. What did I want to do with them? Well, if I start taking them for what they can be used for, I can interrupt space. I can change what's going on around the image. And I can figure out new ways to use the same shapes. And I think I'm going to go with a diagonal on that. But notice how it blends in too much with the red and green, or the red and white that I already have on the background. If you do that, you're kind of stuck and you don't really have a good way to get around that. But what you can do is add something underneath as a way to build your image. And now, when I cross over it, it's no longer blending in. It's starting to become a new element. And this might look silly, but my point is that that is something completely different from what we started with. And it was really simple. Right now, this is what I call a layout. I haven't decided for sure that that's where I want to close things off, but I think it's pretty close to what I want. Maybe I'll take this extra old piece and add it behind for a little bit more contrast. And what I continue to do is I continue to arrange and just literally play with it until I like what I have. I don't need to settle for it. I need to settle for the parts that I already glued, which is why usually we don't start gluing immediately. But I wanted to show you that we don't have to do this so slowly that we can't figure out how to make it work. We can start thinking about this just as practice. So I'm going to call this main layout done, and I'm going to go ahead and glue these pieces. When you're gluing pieces, you want to think about things as layers. So this is my bottommost layer, this is my middle, these are top, and these are details. The details you have to glue last. You need to build from the bottom up and start thinking about your piece as a group of layers that, when you put them together, will build into something new and will build up in a way that makes sense. Think of it like stacking blocks or stacking papers, stacking anything really. So I'm going to go ahead, and because this is less continuous, what I want to do is I'm going to glue the bottom one. You can see that if you want, what you can do is you can take a pen or a marker in this case and give yourself a rough outline of where you want to glue if you're not sure of yourself. I often do this with just by sight. I don't always mark it down, but see, now I have a vague idea of where I need to glue, and I'm just going to start applying that glue layer so that I can truly find where that starts. And now I've got the glue on there already. Flatten it out again. Use the glue stick itself if it's not sticking well enough. Remember, I had those on top of this other layer first, so my next layer that I'm going to do is this one. This is the middle layer. And because I'm gluing onto a wide background, but this is small, I want to put my glue onto this instead of onto the background, because if I put it on this, whatever's left over, the extra glue that gets onto my cutting board or gets onto whatever I'm gluing, I don't have to worry about it. Usually I'll keep a piece of scrap paper around that I can do my gluing on top of. That way, at the end of the day, I don't have a bunch of glue stains on my cutting board. So, how I do it when I'm doing a small detail piece is I make sure that it's coated well all the way around. And you can see that I have a nice little tracing there, and that's because I made absolutely sure I had the whole image covered in glue. And that makes it start bending, so you need to be careful. But now that I've got that, I'm gonna do the same thing as I've been doing. Use that to flatten everything out, and this is stuck perfectly on there. I don't even have to worry about it now, because I know for sure that I covered the entire back of that with glue. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side because this was my middle layer. Those stripes were my top layer. So, next glue, and I try not to put new pieces on the old glue. I let that dry for a little bit, maybe 10 or 20 minutes before I glue on the same spot, just because I don't want to get to a point where I'm ruining the top of my image by rubbing it in glue that was on the bottom. I'm going to put that one there. I went with a little bit higher, but again, this is just a practice run. This is just me showing you how simple you can make this, showing you how simple these techniques can be to create something that you didn't even think would be possible. How am I going to attach something small like this? This is my favorite method. I take the glue stick and just slowly walk your piece of paper across it with your finger. And sometimes it'll come up, sometimes you'll get a little bit of glue over the side. But by walking it down, it achieved the same effect as gluing the other side. I've covered the entire thing in a smooth, continuous layer of glue. Again, that's another way to do the exact same thing I was doing on that paper, because sometimes you don't have extra room to work with and you just want to really move quick, really figure out things as you go. And I decided also, maybe I'll move those down so that they show up a little bit more on top of the orange, because what that does now is, now that I have these elements splitting up the image, now this orange on the outside starts blending in with that, and it looks like it's continuing even though at first it wasn't. I'm using the pieces that I have to change how I look at the image around it. And so I'm going to add those last two pieces, which sometimes when you're working with glue, hands will get sticky and you won't be able to do exactly what you want. It's good to keep a towel or other tools to wipe your hands with so that it doesn't get your fingers so sticky that you can't use them anymore. I'm going to put this last one on here and flatten it down. You notice that I have a rip there. That's okay. Ripping is a technique that you can use to create new pieces in your collage, just like anything else. Say, let's see. Say I have a magazine image and I just tear it. What happens to the paper? I get this white line here. That comes off way differently than a clear cut, like that one. Even though this one is jagged, it's still clear. It doesn't create a border, but every single thing you can do with paper in order to arrange it is a new possible technique to use in collage. So I'm just going to cut this down into a little arc. And does this have a place? I don't know yet. See, sometimes you just rip a piece. In this case, I was using it to show you how it works visually, but I don't think I'll use that in this one. I'm going to call this done. And what I can do is I have other pieces of paper around. I can tape it onto that paper or glue it onto that paper and use that as a background. This is cardstock. It's a little bit thicker than normal paper. That means that it's not going to crease as easily, and it's not going to give me as many problems when I'm trying to store it. Again, when you're doing a big piece, the biggest part you need to worry about is your border. You don't need to worry as much about the inside. You do want to get a good coverage, but you want the border to be as good as you can, because the border is what's going to determine if that paper lifts off the thing underneath it or not. And so I've got this, and I've got it on here now. Flattening it out again, you want to make sure your corners are all flattened down. Now, I've got a couple corners that are lifting up. How can I solve that? If I try to lift that, I don't want to bend it. What you can do is, if you're using a knife for some of your cuts, you can scrape off some of the glue, lift up slightly, and rub the glue on with that knife. And then when you spread that across, it will stick on its own. You want to wipe the knife off, because any glue that's left on there will not help you when you're trying to cut in the future. But there we go. With no material at all, some garbage, some notes that I wrote for the title the other day, a drawing that I did in 10 seconds, I don't even remember, and I have a collage. It's not the most amazing thing in the world, but it's there to show you that the most important part of collage is not what you have to use to make your work with, but instead how you treat it, how you separate the layers so you know what you're building, how you push everything together, stack it on top of each other so that it all builds one complete image.